Welcome to Belmont Poetry Night. I'm Monica Korde, your host and the Poet Laureate of Belmont, California. We meet on the third Tuesdays of every month to celebrate the spoken word as makers, listeners, and admirers of poetry. We come with featured guests and an open mic, inviting readers of all ages. After gathering for several years at our favorite physical venue, the Belmont Library, since the pandemic, our thriving poetry circle has transitioned to this virtual space, and I'm grateful this allows me to welcome poets and listeners from across the globe. It's lovely to see everyone here. As per our poetry night tradition, I invite you to share in the chat the name of the city, state, or country you are zooming in from, whether it's a place you've always been or where you have landed now. I feel these places, whether near or far, are threads in the tapestry of who we are, and I'm really looking forward to seeing where we are all joining from tonight. So please continue sharing, and thanks once again for being here and zooming in. With everything going on right now, uh, the political unrest, the tragedies happening all over the world, I wanted to create a space to hear voices and stories that show the courage, love, and resilience we all need to get through in the tough times. So here we are coming together under this month's theme, which is Queerly Beloved, a sort of love letter written to celebrate the beautiful, radical act of loving and surviving, honoring Pride Month once again through poetry. In a world where the LGBTQIA plus communities face both hard-won progress and persistent backlash, I'm sure you all will agree with me that poetry becomes more than art. It becomes an urgent act of resistance, healing, and truth telling as well. So, here's to the arts and to poetry for giving space to these vital conversations. And on that note, happy Pride to all of you. To begin tonight, I'd like to gather us around a poem that holds all of that and more. So, here's a poem by Reggie Kabiko, a spoken word piece that reclaims space with joy, defiance, and fierce love. Reggie Kabiko calls it a feel good poem, and that's what it is. It is, but it is so much more as well. A queerification for creativity and crisis at the National Mall. Queer me, shift me, transgress me. Tell my students I'm gay. Tell Chick-fil-A I'm queer. Tell the New York Times I'm straight. Tell the mailman I'm a lesbian. Tell American Airlines I don't know what my gender is. Like me, liking you, like summer blockbuster armrest dates. Armrest cinematic love. Elbow to forearm in the dark. Humor me queerly. Fill me with laughter. Make me high with queer gas. Decompress me from centuries of Spanish Inquisition and self righteous judgment, like the blood, my blood that has mixed with the colonizer and the colonized, in the extinct and instinct to love. Bust memories of water and heat and hot and breath, beating skin on skin, fluttering, bruise me into vapors, bleed me into air. Fly me over sub-Saharan Africa and Asia and Antarctica. Explode me from the closet of my fears. Graffiti me out of doubt. Bend me like bamboo. Propose to me, divorce me, divide me into your spirit, two spirit, half spirit, and shadow me with fluttering tongues and caresses beyond head. Heart chakras, fist smashing the djembes between my hesitations, haiku me into 17 bursts of blossoms and cold sake. De-ethnicize me, declothe me, degender me in brassieres and prosthetic genitalias. Burn me on a brazier, wearing a brazier in bitch braggadocio soprano bass. Magnificat me in vespers of hallelujah and amen. Libate me in halos, heal me in halls of femi troubadours, announcing my HIV status or your status. I am not afraid to love you. Implant dialects as if they were lilacs in my ear. Medicate me with a lick and a like. I am not afraid to love you. So demand me, reclaim me, queerify me. Thank you. Reggie Cabico is a highly acclaimed Filipino American poet and spoken word theater artist who made a significant impact on the literary and performance arts scene with his unique blend of poetry and humor and storytelling. And in one of his interviews, he talks about embracing one's own truths and how he discovers that courage through performing on stage as a spoken word poet and to share it in his own words. I quote, "Growing up, it was hard to know what I actually looked like and that I have my own beauty," he says. Up on stage, you have to be this superhero and channel all of this. When you're when you're on stage, you have to be your strongest, most defiant, fiercest, kick-ass self. So brilliantly put, right? Well, that same spirit, standing boldly in one's truth and reclaiming space through voice and presence, also resonates deeply in the work of a remarkable artist you'll be hearing from tonight. As my featured poet this evening, it is my true honor to welcome and introduce Cheng, West Hollywood's Poet Laureate, a powerful poet, a dynamic performance artist, and dedicated cultural advocate. Here's a closer look at her amazing bio. Jen is the Poet Laureate of West Hollywood, author of a poetry collection, Braided Spaces, a California Arts Council Fellow, and a Tin House Workshop alumna. She is a multidisciplinary artist who blends East West influences as Feng Shui poetry. Jen is the creator and facilitator of Palabras Literary Salon, a BIPOC centered series. She is the creator of an interactive sculpture, Poetry Scrabble, to engage audiences with poetry magnets for a collaborative poem. Her writing is found in the Cafe Review, Passenger's Journal, and forthcoming in Flower Song Press and Colossus Press. With stories for tween audiences, mystery detective fans, and queer love, Jen is a cross pollinator and community curator. You can connect with Jen on social media at Gen C Voice or on her website as well at www.gencvoice.com. And I'll put all of the links later in the chat as well for everyone. So please join me in welcoming the wonderful Jen Cheng.
Thank you, Monica, for holding this beautiful space and inviting me to feature. And I'm happy to celebrate Queer Pride Month with all of you. And thank you to Selena for giving us tech support and our queer friends for showing up to bring extra queer poems tonight. I wanted to say I come from originally San Francisco Bay Area. So for tonight's set, I picked more poems that reference San Francisco, so perhaps it might feel very familiar. Braided Spaces I wrote dedicated to those who are finding a voice, and I think that's all of us poets who are finding our voice, layers and layers of it. And this is a beautiful cover that I licensed from a queer Asian American mural artist, um, Lauren Y.S. She's talented, and this is actually based on a femme activist, and I just excerpted her mouth to speak, right? That voice is anything, whether it be song or writing or even a hum. So as a multidisciplinary artist, I actually came up with the concept of feng shui infused tiles that showed up in Santa Monica's 3rd Street Promenade. So I'm doing a little show and tell. And each of these colors are inspired by nature. And I took the color palette to infuse those colors into the play tiles, is what I call them. So I started doing card readings for people just for fun to teach them about the 5 elements. And most of the time, people know feng shui as interior design. And some of us live in apartments and we can't move the door or the window or change things around. And people spend thousands and millions of dollars on interior design to direct their life. And I say, your body, your head, your mindset, the way you walk, the way you are in the world, that's your own 5 elements that you can make a prayer through poetry and reshape and guide your life to what you want it to be more of. So I hope you'll join me on that journey of the 5 elements. And that is something that I'm not a PhD in feng shui. You are not going to get a PhD in feng shui tonight, but I just wanted to show you that my book is organized in the 5 elements to help us grasp certain concepts to help us move along. Before we start on the 5 elements in detail, I wanted to share my poetic influences, and that includes Maya Angelou. And Still I Rise is a favorite poem of mine. And because of Maya Angelou being boldly distinctive and different and multidisciplinary, I wrote this because as an Asian American eldest daughter, I am a disappointment to my parents. And forget even talking about being queer. So if you're not a doctor or a lawyer, sometimes we are disappointments. And I wanted to share this poem to say thank you all for being chosen family in the poetry community, like Monica, and for my friends who gather in community with me at things like Palabras Literary Salon and other community events. So here's the first poem about being different and chosen family. Still I stand. Still I stand, not like a tree, the way my mother told me, but like a dandelion, more scrappy, wild and free, surprising people in the harsh cold of impossibilities. I incubate in disguise, underestimated as a little thing, and spread the blanket of my tribe. We bloom in unfriendly places, season after season. Still I speak, undeniably, with dandelion fields of gold. Now I'll start at the fire element, which, if you look at the Chinese characters, they were originally pictographs like Egyptian hieroglyphics. So I'll share screen just for a moment to give you what the character for fire looks like. Has that sprouting kind of energy. I don't know who was there in the 1990s in San Francisco, but if you remember the Joseph Schmidt chocolate truffles, they are a very fond memory. Joseph Smith chocolate truffles at the office holiday party made me question if I was not actually bisexual, and perhaps I was further along in the lesbian zone. Chocolate perky boobs with the perfectly dotted apex, molten centers of flavored cream melted me with lust. Maybe someone will notice my gusto at the dessert table, look past my too innocent exterior, and ask me out to a dyke extravaganza. Most friends saw me as a foodie, but my roommate knew better and laughed at my sapphic swoon. The mere memory of these now extinct confections sets off a wet mouth, tongue ready for this over affection of cream interiors. Who else is a chocolate fan? You understand. You don't have to be lesbian for that. The next element is earth, and I'll show you the character for that. It's very square and stable, right? It's got flooring. So for earth, I wanted to share postmodern sapphos. So I thought, well, if I'm going to be a lesbian poet, I'm better study the original lesbian poet Sappho. So it takes a little bit of a while to learn the rhythm. If you want to give it a try, it's a lot of fun, but to say don't expect to get it right away. Postmodern Sapphos. Eager, lush magnolia flowers blossom. Seek admirers loving the lazy Sunday. Ready bagels, cream cheese, and mango lassi. Newspapers open. Hear the cozy morning doves coo and flutter. Open windows joining the neighbor's passion. Bring on lilts and harmonies. Sing with pride for memories later. Fluid inspiration that slides from side to side, unfettered, gender free roles that further child's play with privileged toys to harness liberty's pleasure. Special thanks to a dear friend, Melinda Palacio, for reprinting that in the Santa Barbara Independent. Um, the funny thing was she asked me for something queer light, and I sent her that. If you understand the innuendos, you will get it. The next element is metal. And I love the way that the top has like kind of like a tin roof kind of feel. So, and there's like protection, there's structure, there's a little bit of spark in the fire. So metal is actually fire and earth, compounding. So it's like concrete and obsidian and crystals and things like that. And speaking of crystals, I am wearing the lesbian flag in crystals here. And I am wearing metal covered ginkgo leaf. So I was like, sometimes it's hard to be queer and Asian. So let me just do it in the jewelry. And of course, it's got tangled now. All right, we won't worry about that. So for metal, I wanted to honor my mentors who made it okay for me to be queer. And I had the privilege of coming out in San Francisco, so I don't have a lot of the shame that some of my queer brothers and sisters and non-binary friends have. So that is the joy of San Francisco Bay Area. So this is an excerpt from Mentors with the letter M, and I've renamed my mentor to protect her identity. But if you know who she is, you will know who she is. Marla normalized things I didn't know yet were taboo. I came for freedom of speech under attack for my underground paper and found a fondness for leather daddies who met her for drinks at the stud and a fascination with her butch girlfriend who picked her up on a motorcycle. She mobilized spirited youth activists as leaders of high school conferences. She taught us facilitation skills, made us fearless public speakers. We took over the convention centers like this world belonged to us, and chatted with civil rights lawyers and hippie activists like we were equals. She had us use the copy machines, make banners, staple signs, and gave us stellar office and organizing skills. She played our mixed tapes for the events as the angsty soundtracks for our peers' memories. She patiently worked on a Saturday so that we could trek in from everywhere, like Redwood City, Walnut Creek, and Marin. The BART train was our tunnel to freedom, and she let us stay extra late as she fed us pizza. She knew we needed this space for weirdos, nerds, and geeks. She welcomed me when I arrived as a 30-something in New York City, not surprised that I was one of many from that cohort who finally came out as queer. She was organizing a lesbian feminism conference and put me on the panel about sex with her now ex from San Francisco. She saw I was a third wave instigator, empowered in skirts and 3-inch heels, and assigned me to debate her ex, the second wave butch, moderated by a soft tomboy who watched me confuse their old school chivalry by opening the door first for them to walk in. She continued her role as a mentor voluntarily as she sent me to interview with a Brooklyn radio show for a post-conference debrief to represent a lesbian perspective, pushing me to be daring yet again. Metal also stands for not only mentors, but when you're doing mental acrobatics, if you're thinking like internet or technology or science or like trying to make sense of the world where sometimes it won't make sense. And this poem I wrote after a gun shooting, and it talks about intersectionality. At least it wasn't. On Lunar New Year Day, I woke up to a text from my not so social East Coast friend. Just checking in. I read about the terrible shooting. My first instinct was to quickly search West Hollywood shooting while praying very hard, please don't let it be another gay club targeted by a hater. Something about something on Sunset Boulevard turned up on the Google search, but at least it wasn't a gay bar targeted last night. My second step was to look on social media. What happened? Instagram gave me the latest about Monterey Park, with no information about the gunman. I prayed very hard again. Please don't let this be an anti-Asian hate crime. I survived through the 90s as a social justice organizer. I don't want there to be a terrible threat of burning riots. When I found out it was an Asian gunman, at least it wasn't a racial attack. Now, can we finally get the spotlight on toxic masculinity, mental health, domestic violence, and gun control? Intersectionality is not a convenient word white liberals can throw around as lip service to say they understand. The threats, the survivor traumas, the thought patterns, at least it wasn't worse, is how some of us get through one day at a time. The next section is water. And water flows down mountains and it spreads out to little streams. So this character reminds me of migration, of water feeding a source of whatever you're trying to grow. And in this one, oh, before I do that one, I have one more from metal. Is that true? Okay, I think this is in water. Because water is also career, that's right. So when I graduated from college, I had a feminist crisis and cried in front of my professor. So this is the poem that came out of that embarrassing moment. Job requirements, fishnets or pantyhose. In that split second, the splinter under the desk that snagged my pantyhose decided the course of my young adult life. It was only 10 a.m. and a second of 5 interviews to win a job offer with golden handcuffs so I could cash in on my economics degree. But the rip without the immediate defense of clear nail polish was only going to grow into an embarrassing tear that kept running for the rest of the day. The well-meaning classmates who primed me for this rat race told me that gray-haired partners at the big bank had conservative standards, that women could not wear pantsuits because pantsuits were too liberal. Those guys would never understand this extra burden of wardrobe anxiety. As a dancer, it was easier for me to wear fishnets. Dan skin made them extra durable heavyweight, and if they snagged a rip, just added to the sexy look. And as a halfway decent second violinist who could dance and wear a wig, I was recruited to play for a corporate band with travel perks to a castle in Quebec City and a beachfront hotel in Kauai. I broke down crying to my philosophy professor over my feminist angst of these choices. Band or bank, the difference between one consonant. What are my roles after being a college student but to be objectified as a sexy siren or to fit in a box as a dutiful capitalist? The queer professor shook her head with no advice while standing in her comfortable shoes. Rousseau nor anything else in my books would help me. The splinter made the decision, since I couldn't wipe the worry about the pantyhose off my face or remember enough from the sports page to bond with the bank bros. Casey and the Sunshine Band's medley gave me long whole notes to shake my booty to play for the bankers at night, or tech bros celebrating the Star Wars prequel. I found a day job crunching census data at a think tank, the closest thing to staying in college, and an office with a loose dress code free from pantyhose. At dark, I changed to a wig, tiny short shorts, and fishnets that didn't tear, for a road more traveled. Yes, that was intentionally read like a newscaster from an old-timey movie because the choices of patriarchy are everlasting the same. The next session is wood. And wood feels like there's a canopy of trees where the boughs give a little bit of shade and protection. I'll read your comments later. I can't read the comments right now. This one is for those of us who have survived all kinds of intergenerational trauma and trying to find ways to explain our family to ourselves and how we just don't fit in sometimes. So this is written as an abecedarian, but it is also a persona poem. So I'm going to share that with you for a second. So if you know Bridgerton, you know Lady Whistledown. She's the gossip queen. And I was writing about Grandma, who was a bit of a mental case. But if you write it from the gossip queen's point of view, she's highly entertaining. Bridgerton's narrator spills the tea about my grandma. Grandma dearly departed with a grand hurrah, hailing respect instead of grief. In turn, her memorial party was her dream birthday celebration as she just died gracefully of heart failure in her sleep. Kind of a quiet exit, but so obvious as her last symphony. Manipulation was her modus operandi, so none of her surviving 7 children could say no to showing up. Over all the years of plots she orchestrated to stoke personality struggles with believable lies, as the drama queen and mother mastermind of recurring rivalries between siblings. You needed the latest headlines to know who was mad at whom in this telenovela that could outdrink other families under the table. Air violins would play to whine about one sister's injustice or how xenophobia ruined a brother's attempts at a white-collar career. Zoetic puzzle of where, yarn schemes were where she left behind, with a zoetic puzzle of where she might have hidden her jewelry. Accumulated hiding places were ways to anchor her bravery through war, occupation, and poverty as she silently sang her survival song. Conducting her power even from beyond, her heirs cleaned her home, dug through every jacket, looking for secret pockets, ever reminded how this frail elder knew how to perform her finale. Thank you. I turn it back to Monica. We have some questions to discuss.
Absolutely, Jen. But what a great opening there, and especially what a radiant opening with the Maya Angelou piece as well. Thank you so much. She has been a poetic influence for me as well for so many years, and I'm really glad that you brought her in this room through your piece there. And we are all floored already by the way you've just started off and dived into poetry tonight. So thank you so much again for sharing all of that. I think since you gave us the poems about the five elements, I think I have a question in relation to that. But firstly, I love how your poetry engages with the five elements. I don't know if you read the wood poem. I think that is still remaining, but we'll.
Yes, that was the wood poem.
This was the wood one. Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Wood represents family, so that thank you for bringing that up. Wood represents family, so that last section is about family.
Got it. So we had wood, fire, earth, metal, and water as well. But I feel that these are you are putting them into poetry not just as symbols, but also as emotional and thematic energies. And I love how you use that elemental framework to create so many layers. Just as one of the poems that I heard long back as a recording of your performance quite a while ago, and I'm referring to 10,000 Butterflies, which I loved so much for how powerful it was, and that kinetic meditation on the ripple effects of small actions and the emotional urgency behind all of it. So, considering all of that and the elements poems that you shared, in all of the sense, I also find that your work often speaks to immigrant and queer survival and intergenerational care or intersectionality, like you mentioned, and the quiet power of small gestures in healing the community, which leads me to wonder how do these threads come together in your poetry, especially in relation to how you imagine love or how you meditate on belonging and identity and resilience in your poetry.
Well, I'll start with the last poem. Is an example of resilience by my grandma, who was illiterate and poor, and to place her in the her story in the voice of Regency upper class British life.
Mm,
She's a Hong Kong colonial, so
mm,
I am now elevating someone who would never have been written in the gossip rags of British colonialism. So
mm,
I did this as a rebellion against colonialism. I'm decentering to center. I'm using this ingrained respect that we have for British narration as some authority. So here's
mm,
a disempowered woman who survived war, occupation, and poverty, and she is being celebrated as a celebrity because she was a drama queen and manipulated people in her family because that was her sense of power, right? She
mm,
didn't have money, but she could manipulate her children. And if you think about it, that is a psychological analysis that I came up with because I was like, why would someone do that? Because I'm a good hearted person. I would never think about manipulating a group of people. That just didn't make sense to me as a child. But as a poet, it makes sense.
mm,
So I think, you know, you talk about resilience, how we imagine love. I did not expect my grandma to show up in my poetry. She's been
mm,
long gone. And she did love me. She manipulated everybody else, but I didn't think she manipulated me. She bought me ice cream, and sometimes those small gestures are enough. Like, you know, somebody's being kind and buying you ice cream and says, shh, don't tell your mother I bought you ice cream. Um, so,
mm,
you know, when you say small gestures, even though I came to my queer professor with an existential crisis. I'm like, band or bank, what career choices do I have? She didn't have answers for me, but her kindness and just listening to me and not shaming me for having an existential crisis
mm.
just listening is enough. And I recently spoke to a middle school um, group of Asians and what they call GSA, Gay Straight Alliance, or a queer student group. And they were able to meet in one room. And
Mm,
that is immense progress for me. I told them I did not have this when I was a teenager.
mm,
I don't know how I would have turned out differently. And then one of the kids was so smart. She asked me, "So, how would you have turned out differently?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't know. I might have actually had a girlfriend in high school, but instead, I didn't date. I didn't know what I was. I just knew I wasn't boy crazy and I didn't fit in. I didn't know what that meant." So I
mm,
think having just even one listener, one teacher, one mentor,
mm.
one ally, that one person can be meaningful and can save a life for a very confused and stressed out teenager or a queer person.
Absolutely, Jen. I hear you, and it applies to all parts of our lives, I guess. To have that kind listening ear, whom you can share your thoughts with, or whom you can share your emotions with, and really unburden yourself in some ways. So, thank you for sharing that, Jen. It's interesting to know how all of these threads come into your poetry and how you weave them into these beautiful pieces that we get to hear tonight. Would you like to continue with a couple more poems and then come back to a question again?
I think that was my set of poems because
Oh, that's it?
I wanted to I wanted to give room for conversation. So
Okay.
I'm happy to entertain questions from the audience. I haven't had a chance to repeatedly publicize that the
Mm-hmm.
Bridgerton narrator as Lady Whistledown was a way to decolonize my grandma who grew up as a British colonial. So thank you
Mm.
for having time and space for us to say the intentionality of some of these poems. So
Absolutely, Jen. But yeah, I definitely have a few more questions for you, and we'll open up the floor for our audience as well later. But in general, listening to your work, it's clear how deeply rooted it is in identity and in community, in education as well, all of which I feel is so connected to your role as a poet laureate, especially now in this political moment. I think your poetry opens spaces for these kinds of conversations we really need, and those that really help us move toward real inclusion and challenge the stereotypes that still linger around us. So I'd like to get into a conversation with a question that builds on this as to as the first queer woman of color to serve as West Hollywood's poet laureate. You occupy a civic platform seldom offered to Asian American queer voices. And with this platform comes the chance to shape conversations and open doors. So, as a poet laureate, how do you wield that visibility to challenge exclusion and create a room for more inclusive and intersectional expression, especially within the local art spaces and communities?
there's still an enduring stereotype that gay people are white.
Mm,
When I first came out to my mom, I made sure I showed her a photo album of queer Asian people so she couldn't say that it's not possible that you're queer because only white people are queer. So that kind of internalized racism and also externalized racism. A lot of people of color don't feel like they are visible in the LGBTQ plus community. So I joke that I'm a public lesbian. Like I parade around everywhere being a lesbian. Um, so that's a different identity than what I'm used to. And
mm,
I I say that I insist on talking about intersectionality because um, queer people come in all shapes and sizes, abilities, origins, ethnic, gender expressiveness. And as a public person, as a civic arts ambassador, I do my best to show up to other city events and trying to meet new people and invite them to come into poetry. And there are simple things like walking up and down the street, getting groceries, and I run into my neighbor who's an older white lady who says, I have to confess, I don't like poetry. My best friend buys poetry books, and that makes no sense to me. And so I wrote the city poems in a way to be more accessible to the non poetry fan. And then
Mhm.
for poetry fans like who's here tonight, I'm thankful that you're here to witness and listen and engage in conversation with some of the deeper themes of intersectionality. I think in diversity and inclusion, this is not even about poetry. This is just about diversity and inclusion. As an activist, as a community minded person, you go talk to people who don't look like you. That's a
Mm.
first step, right? Um, I don't have to go to the Drag Laureates events, but I want to go to the Drag Laureates events because I want my trans and drag friends, colleagues to know that I'm an ally. I'm there to support them, and I hope they would give poetry a try. And some of them are very talented authors and writers already. So um, I think it's important that I show up for other people and I talk to people who don't look like me. And I encourage everybody to please do that to create a stronger fabric of a diverse and inclusive society.
Absolutely. That's so well put, Jen. And I'm really glad that that is a way of bringing so many different voices in, especially also the performative aspect of your poetry. The rhythm and spontaneity in your poems felt so alive, like the performance itself was part of the meaning, not just how the words were delivered, but you really brought us into the moment. So thank you for sharing all of that. And I think it brings me to a really significant question I had on my mind. All of your pieces held so much quiet strength and a powerful space for reflection, especially around selfhood and change. And in the evolving LGBTQIA plus cultural landscape, some poets embrace labels as empowering. For example, Reggie Kabiko puts it as labels are like passports, a new entry point, while a few others like Ocean Wong warn against the limits of being defined by them when he says, and I'll quote him, go beyond the tokenizing label, where he believes that the abstracted label cannot hold anybody. So I also simply admire the way he speaks about resisting labels and realizing that our contingencies map who we are rather than these labels that the culture likes to traffic in because they are easy to manipulate and they move like units or get clicks. So I love that your poems hold so many selves, whether they are spoken or unspoken, in a very beautiful way, and they invite us to sit with a sort of multiplicity, to let identity remain unfixed or alive and in motion, which makes me want to ask you, how do you approach labels in your work? Are they creative anchors or constraints? And as a storyteller and improv artist, especially, how does that experience inform your poetic voice, especially when you're exploring the freedom to move beyond conventional definitions while staying authentic to your own story?
Well, I'm very thankful to my undergraduate professors who encouraged critical thinking. And I realize now later in life that that's not always true in everyone's education. Um, and so I did learn a lot about critical race theory early on, and that's the legal theory that helped ground some of our civil rights progress in terms of defining our rights. And those legal theorists had been working on it since, before I came to being a college student in the 90s. So when you talk about labels, there's a whole philosophy, and I encourage you all to read on your own more about critical race theory instead of letting the news media or political pundits use critical race theory as a hate term.
Mm.
Critical race theory looks at essentialism, which is putting labels and words and defining people as a certain way. And then on the other end of the spectrum is anti-essentialism, where, you know, somebody might say, don't define me as Asian, I'm just a human. But if you're also calling yourself a human, that's still a label, right? And because we have to use words, there will always be labels. And
Mm.
so Monica and I might be seen as Asian American, but we come from a different lineage. And Asian
Mm.
American is how Americans have defined people from abroad that seem similar, but the Pacific Islanders have a different uh, diaspora and language and legacy that I don't even know much about. And I try very hard to be a good ally and learn more, a little bit more each year about different ethnic groups within Asia. And I'm still not very educated about AAPI, Native Hawaiian, you know, Native Indigenous Samoan, all of that. It's a huge world. So
Mm.
one, we have to use words. So therefore, labels must exist. And so the critical race theorists talk about strategic anti-essentialism. So yes, Monica and I, we are Asian American. And at the same time, we are different kinds of Asian. And even between me and my sister, who grew up in the same family, we're different kinds of Asian, even though we had the same genetic parents, right? Because I have a different political perspective than she does.
Mm.
I'm queer and she's not. Me and other queer people don't have the same perspective. So that's strategic anti essentialism, acknowledging our specialness, acknowledging our individual uniqueness, but at the same time, in order to protect our rights, we need to talk about LGBTQ as a category so that we have access to bathrooms and education and medical care that does not become exclusionary. So, for the sake of civil rights, the sake of human rights, we do need labels and we do need to communicate and hear our words and witness each other's stories. And also, even two sisters in the same family are not one stereotype or a lump. So we have to acknowledge people's uniqueness.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for sharing those insights and wise words, Jen. Really, I mean, I have so much more to ask, but I would like to leave some room for some audience comments or thoughts as well. But I just wanted to say that your poetry tonight was not only a celebration of pride, but also of the many ways we embody change, from the elemental to the emotional. I think your words truly gave voice to resilience and vulnerability and deep presence, most of all, I feel. So, thank you so much for these gifts. I'll let our audience have a quick minute to share a word or have a question. If you'd like to take a brief moment, anyone, please feel free to unmute yourselves and watch out the chat space for links to Jen's work. I'll be putting those in a moment.
And as you're thinking of your questions, I'll reinvigorate the visual space with this is the fire element, inspired by some photos of volcanoes. This is the water element, inspired by coral reefs. This is the earth element, inspired by Sedona's desert. This is the metal element. It was the most colorful metal I could find, which is called bismuth. It kind of reminded me of silicon chips, the way it was very rainbowy. And this is the wood element. I wanted to find something colorful that contrasted against earth, right? And this is inspired by tulips. So wood is not only trees, but on any vegetation that's growing, the ecosystem that we all live in. And they are elements that work with each other. No one is better than the other. And I joke that I'm a Taurus, I'm very grounded, I'm a very earthy person, and I need my Pisces friends to help me go with the flow. I need my Aries friends to get me out to the party because otherwise I might stay home. We need the Virgos to be the office manager and accountant and CPAs to keep us organized. So if you know a little bit about astrology, hopefully those little analogies made sense to you.
All right, I have included links to Jen's work and upcoming events as well in the chat. So please go ahead and save those as well if you'd like. And if you have any questions or comments, now's the time.
I do teach online classes for those of you who don't live in LA area. So please also check out my Substack, which I forgot to give Monica, which is also the same handle, Gen C Voice. You can read the origins of how certain poems came to be, and the upcoming events will always list a class. And most of my classes are free. And if you do come to Los Angeles to visit and you're looking for a poetry event, I'm happy to be your ambassador, and write me an email. Tell me you're coming, and I'll be like, oh, yeah, these events are happening even if I'm not hosting it. Because if you're visiting and want to be a traveler of poetry, please come travel and visit poetry spaces. I'm going to be in New York in October. So if anyone knows of good poetry events, I'll be presenting at a conference at the end of October. I'll be visiting with poetry spaces there.
Hi, Jen. I wanted to ask you, I guess it's a craft question, or to see your reaction on the piece that you described as an existential crisis, which I really enjoyed. I'm wondering, when you wrote it, did you know how you were going to perform it, or did that come later?
I think I unconsciously knew it. And I had wrestled with that as a potential short story or essay. And that title, Fishnets or Pantyhose, had always been a good catchphrase. And then it wasn't quite fully there because out of context, people didn't understand what that meant. And it was a job requirement. So a poet friend helped me find the title. And once we found the title, then I was like, oh, this is like a timeless newscaster from those old timey movies. So I think the title helped me. In general, as a writer, and I don't know how true it is for each of you, when I have a title, it's easier to edit my poem or really write to a poem. So, yeah, titles help, and so do your poet friends. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Jen, this is Lois, and I really enjoyed all of your readings tonight. I have a question about being a poet laureate. Monica certainly has taught me a lot, just being in her space and seeing how she so eloquently gets through her days as poet laureate of Belmont. I wanted to ask, what inspires you in your space? Is it people? Would it be people or structures or plants and nature, or all of the above?
What inspires me for which part of my poet laureate position?
The writings that you may be asked to do from time to time, or maybe just kind of what you thought your goal would be for the time that you would be poet laureate.
Thank you for that question. I feel very honored that I come from a city that gives us a poet laureate stipend, and they have a very clear expectation of what we do, and that is thanks to the arts division being part of economic development. And if you remember, I was actually an economics major in undergrad, and artists are culture makers. We make culture, and we are what drives tourism and leisure spending money. So first of all, I say I'm honored and thankful to West Hollywood for valuing us as laborers. We put in labor to attract people and redefine the culture of the city. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is the city poems that we write odes to the city. So it's not necessarily true for all poet laureates, but I think generally the poet laureates write odes to celebrate the city. I mentioned this briefly to the neighbor who didn't like poetry. She inspired me to write a poem that was like a recipe because I had already written it like a recipe, but I knew people like her existed. So I was delighted that I already wrote the city poem in a recipe way because I'm like, everyone loves recipes. Magazines like Better Homes and Gardens, like Real Simple. Everybody loves a food channel show. I don't know. Let's just celebrate the city like a recipe. And boom, it was ready for someone who says, I don't like poetry. That was thank you. I appreciated her inspiring me to write a Substack about that. And then the most recent city poem I wrote was inspired by Emily Dickinson. And if you haven't seen the Apple TV show Dickinson, you can watch clips of it on YouTube. And it's very beautifully done, like excerpts of her poetry. But I found a secondhand bookstore and this biography, like a very thorough biography of Emily Dickinson's life and analysis of her poems. So I just swam in that vibe. Like I really read that book over the course of 2 days intensely. And then boom, an Emily Dickinson inspired poem came out of me. So if you're ever fighting with writer's block or needing inspiration, I say go read something you love already and then dig deeper, go down a rabbit hole and read more of that. And you'll never be at a loss for words because in improv theater, which I've studied, we say things are in the air, right? If we connect about Maya Angelou, then what does that lead to something else? Like, that leads to something else that kind of popcorns, it's in the air, that's between us in this virtual space. So yes, thank you, Lois. I hope that answered your question. I'm happy for any follow-ups.
Oh, thank you. You certainly did. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. In the time we have, I loved the questions that the audience had, and thank you so much for asking those questions. And Jen, once again, much gratitude for your time and your voice and the powerful work that you do. It's been a real pleasure to host you, and I hope you enjoyed this reading and experience as well.
Thank you. I love the questions you all asked, and thank you for sharing your time with me. I think this is important that we hear each other's stories. I'm excited to hear the open mic and see what other stories are in the air to connect on.
So true, Jen. Well, I shall invite you once again at the end of our open mic segment to offer us a closing poem. But for now, please enjoy the rest of your evening. With that, we are going to stop recording this segment. Those of you who are in the Zoom room, please stay online for the open mic segment of the evening. To the YouTube audience, thanks for joining in and hope to see you for next month's virtual Belmont Poetry Night. Good night.